Welcome to Book Summary Podcast, your gateway to personal transformation. Each episode delivers big ideas from the world's most impactful books on mindset, productivity, and success, all in just a few minutes. Ready to turn knowledge into action? Let's get started.
Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a story that's, it's pretty harrowing, but it's also deeply insightful. It really sets the stage perfectly for what we're exploring today, the vital skill of rethinking.
It's quite a story.
So imagine this. It's a scorching hot August afternoon, 1949. 15 elite smokejumpers. These are like the best firefighters in the country. They parachute into Man Gulch, Montana. Their mission, tackle this raging forest fire.
Yeah, and it was an incredibly dangerous situation, almost hard to fathom today. These were highly trained guys, professionals. Their instincts, everything they'd learned over years would scream, run away from the fire, use your tools, fight it directly, follow the plan.
Absolutely. So they're making their way down this steep slope, heading towards a river. The plan is to dig a fire line. Standard stuff. But then, boom, disaster strikes. In just a flash, the fire leaps across the gulch. It roars towards them. We're talking flames 30 feet high, moving incredibly fast, like 2 football fields in less than a minute.
Unbelievable speed.
Tragically, 12 of those smoke jumpers died right there. But 3 survived. And their survival, it hangs on one man's almost unthinkable decision. The foreman, Wagner Dodge.
Dodge. Yeah, he didn't just react in that moment of, extreme peril. He rethought. And he did it with the speed and clarity that just defied the circumstances.
He made a totally counterintuitive choice, right? Went against every single thing he and his team knew, everything they'd been trained for.
Exactly. He deliberately started another fire.
A fire. His own fire. An escape fire, burning a patch of grass right in front of him, and then he stepped into the charred area, the ashes.
It sounds completely nuts, doesn't it? His crew, they were used to battling blazes, fighting them head on. They just couldn't wrap their minds around starting one.
So they clung to their ingrained responses, run from the fire, carry your heavy gear. And that choice, that inability to rethink in the moment, tragically cost them their lives.
It's heartbreaking. Investigators later found that if they simply dropped their packs, these 20-pound packs, their axes, shovels, they could have moved maybe 15–20% faster.
Wow. That could have made all the difference.
It might have. They might have reached the ridge before the fire got them. One victim, they found him still clutching his chainsaw, just couldn't let go.
So what's truly fascinating here, the key thing, is that Dodge's survival wasn't about thinking slower, like analyzing every single option meticulously.
No, not at all. It was about thinking faster, but crucially, overturning these deeply seated assumptions, these automatic responses. He swiftly overrode things that, in normal firefighting, would be life-saving.
Like running away from fire.
Exactly. This was pure improvisation. Nobody had ever taught him this escape fire technique. Experts had spent their whole careers studying wildfires and hadn't thought of it.
So the Man Gulch story, it's more than just a dramatic tale. It's this brutal reminder of how our instincts, our standard ways of thinking, can actually betray us when the world throws us a curveball.
Right. What's the core lesson there? For me, it's that the world changes constantly, and our knowledge, our mental toolkit, needs to change right along with it. Dodge survived because of cognitive flexibility, that ability to let go of old ideas and adapt super fast.
In a crisis, maybe the most dangerous phrase really is, well, that's how we've always done it.
Pretty much.
And okay, while our daily lives hopefully don't involve literal raging infernos,
Hopefully not.
this story has this surprising, almost unnerving connection to us, doesn't it? It highlights this crucial skill, the ability to rethink. The stakes might be lower for us. We're usually not fighting for our lives.
Right.
But the mistakes, the mental traps we fall into, they can be strikingly similar. We cling to old ways of thinking, old habits, old opinions, sometimes until it's, metaphorically too late, or maybe even literally in some cases.
Precisely. And that's what this whole deep dive is about today, that very power. The power of knowing what you don't know. We're drawing heavily from Adam Grant's brilliant book, Think Again.
Great book.
It really is. And our mission today is to explore why rethinking is not just like a nice-to-have skill, but absolutely crucial in the world we live in now, which changes so fast.
We'll uncover the common barriers, the things that stop us from updating our mental software in life. And most importantly, arm you, our listeners, with some practical strategies to actually cultivate this skill. both for yourself and in how you interact with others.
Yeah, think of us as your guides to getting better at challenging your own assumptions, adapting your views. We're going to pull out the core ideas, some surprising facts, and those practical insights that can help you navigate a world that really demands constant mental agility.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this foundational idea first. Why do we even need to rethink?
Well, the foundational idea here, the reason rethinking is so necessary, really boils down to this deeply ingrained human tendency. Psychologists call it seizing and freezing.
Seizing and freezing. I like that phrase. It captures it perfectly. That preference we have for the cozy comfort of conviction over the discomfort, sometimes even the terror of doubt.
Exactly. It's like we're all about updating our possessions, aren't we?
Oh, totally. Our wardrobes, kitchen gadgets, phones. We'll spend hours researching the latest smart fridge or the newest phone model.
Right. But then, when it comes to our knowledge, our opinions, especially the deeply held ones, we tend to cling to them with surprising tenacity. It's almost ironic.
Yeah, we might laugh at someone still rocking, Windows 95 on their computer.
Yeah.
But many of us are still holding on to opinions we formed back in, maybe 1995. We seek out info that makes us feel good, that confirms what we already think, rather than stuff that genuinely challenges us.
It's just like that old myth about the boiled frog, you know?
Oh yeah, the frog in the pot. The story goes, if you drop a frog into scalding water, it leaps right out. But if you put it in lukewarm water and slowly turn up the heat,
it just boils to death because it doesn't notice the gradual change until it's too late. It's such a popular story, a great metaphor for missing slow changes.
It is popular, and apparently it's also scientifically completely untrue.
Yeah, totally untrue. I looked into this. If you drop a frog in really hot water, yeah, it'll get badly burned, might escape, might not. But in the slow boiling pot, the frog will leap out as soon as that water gets uncomfortably warm.
Huh.
Frogs are actually quite good at sensing and reacting to changing conditions. Better than the myth suggests.
Okay, so it's not the frogs who fail to reevaluate, it's us.
Exactly. Once we hear a compelling story like that, a dramatic narrative, we tend to accept it. We rarely bother to question it later. We fail to rethink these accepted stories, these beliefs, often until it's too late. Because we prefer the certainty of conviction, even if it's wrong, over the uncertainty of doubt.
We're the ones maybe sitting in the slowly warming water, metaphorically speaking.
We are. And that tendency to seize and freeze on a belief or an answer, it leads directly to another core problem, what Grant calls the first instinct fallacy.
The first instinct fallacy. Okay, explain that one.
It's the common, deeply ingrained idea that our initial answers, our gut reactions, our first thoughts are always the best ones, and that we should never change them.
Oh, that one hits home. I definitely remember teachers telling me, don't second guess yourself. Stick with your first answer on a test. It was always framed as, like, a sign of confidence.
It's such common advice, isn't it? A piece of conventional wisdom. But the actual evidence, it overwhelmingly suggests the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, a huge review of 33 different studies by psychologists found that in every single one of them, the vast majority of times, students changed their answers on exams. They went from wrong to right.
Every single study.
Every single one. It wasn't even close, like a 50-50 thing. It was consistently better to change your mind. And there was this one big study, over 1,500 students in Illinois, they actually counted the eraser marks on their tests.
Okay.
They found only about a quarter of the changes were from right to wrong, but a full half, twice as many, were from wrong to right.
Half. Wow. That's incredible. So it's not just that changing your answer can be good. It sounds like the very act of considering changing it, just engaging that rethinking process, might actually improve your score.
That seems to be part of it. And this applies way beyond exams, of course.
How so? In daily life.
Yeah, in daily life, we often hesitate at the very idea of rethinking. We cling to a first impression of someone, or the first solution that pops into our head for a problem, or our initial opinion on some complex issue, even when there's new information suggesting we should reconsider.
It's like this fundamental mental block, this internal resistance.
Exactly. It stops us from reevaluating our assumptions, even small ones. And that hesitation can prevent us from reaching much better outcomes.
And what's really fascinating, maybe a little unsettling, is that this resistance, this difficulty rethinking, can sometimes be even more pronounced in people we'd least expect.
Ah, yes. That brings us to what I find truly mind-boggling, the paradox of intelligence.
Right. You'd think, logically, the smarter you are, the more open-minded, the more adaptable you'd be. Makes sense, right?
It seems like it should. But it turns out a higher IQ doesn't automatically guarantee mental flexibility or openness to rethinking. Sometimes it can actually be, as Grant puts it, a kind of curse.
A curse. How can being smarter be a curse when it comes to thinking?
Well, it's incredibly counterintuitive, I know, but the research backs this up. Mike Lazaridis, the brilliant co-founder of BlackBerry, he's a classic, almost tragic example.
Oh, BlackBerry. Yeah.
He was an absolute genius in device design, the technical wizard behind it all. But he clung so fiercely to his conviction about physical keyboards, even as touchscreens were just undeniably taking over the market with the iPhone's meteoric rise.
I remember reading he dismissed adding an internet browser way back in '97. Thought it would drain the battery, use too much bandwidth.
Yeah, and even later, around 2010, he resisted letting BlackBerry Messenger, their encrypted texting, work on competitors' phones. Basically missed out on an opportunity that WhatsApp later snapped up for, what, $19 billion?
$19 billion. It's like his own brilliance blinded him to the shift.
In that specific context, his intelligence kind of became a liability. It reinforced his existing biases. It made him an incredibly articulate, persuasive preacher for the virtues of the BlackBerry keyboard, and a really effective prosecutor against the perceived flaws of Apple's touchscreen.
So he was doubling down on his loyal users, the keyboard lovers.
Right. Instead of seeing the huge potential of new users who wanted something totally different, he got stuck in this overconfidence cycle, and his own smarts fueled it.
And this isn't just like one anecdote about one smart guy making a mistake. It's a pattern, isn't it?
It is. Studies show that higher IQ can actually correlate with falling for stereotypes more easily.
Wait, really? How?
Because smart people are often faster at recognizing patterns, which is usually good, but it can also make them quicker to jump to stereotypical conclusions and then worse at updating those beliefs when they see evidence that contradicts the stereotype.
Okay, that's worrying.
And then there's the gun law study. It's quite stark. They took people with exceptional math skills, real analytical whizzes. When the data supported their pre-existing beliefs about gun control, whether they were for or against it, they interpreted it incredibly accurately. No problem.
Made sense.
But if the exact same data contradicted their ideology, say, the data suggested a gun ban failed and the person was liberal, or it suggested a gun ban worked and the person was conservative suddenly, their math skills became a liability.
How? They couldn't do the math anymore.
They could do the math, but they failed spectacularly at analyzing the patterns correctly if those patterns challenged their deeply held views. Their intelligence actually helped them rationalize away the inconvenient truths, find flaws in the data that weren't really there, rather than confronting the possibility they might be wrong.
Wow. So intelligence, instead of being this pure force for clarity, it can actually be weaponized against the truth.
Pretty much. Instead of helping us see more clearly, it can make us better at finding clever reasons to, well, preach our faith, prosecute our case against the other side, or politic for our team, rather than genuinely trying to understand, to learn, and importantly, to rethink.
Okay, so what's driving that? Why does intelligence get twisted like that?
Well, this leads us directly to two key psychological biases that are really powerful drivers here: confirmation bias and desirability bias.
The classics. Confirmation bias, that's seeing what we expect to see, right? Like you buy a red car, suddenly red cars are everywhere.
Exactly. Your brain starts filtering for it, even though the number of red cars hasn't changed. And desirability bias is very similar. It's seeing what we want to see, filtering information through the lens of our desires, our preferences.
So together, they're like these powerful, invisible filters on reality.
They really are. And they actively prevent us from applying our intelligence objectively. They can actually contort our intelligence, twist it, making us astonishingly unaware of the flaws in our own thinking.
So we become great at spotting the logical fallacies in other people's arguments.
Oh yeah, brilliant at that.
But remain stubbornly blind to our own mistakes.
Completely blind. It's like our brains are running this constant internal propaganda campaign defending our existing beliefs.
Man, it makes you really wonder how often these biases are running in my own life.
Yeah.
You know? Especially on topics I feel strongly about. It must be incredibly hard to be objective about yourself.
It is incredibly hard. And a big reason for that difficulty is something called the totalitarian ego.
The totalitarian ego. Sounds ominous.
It kind of is. It's like our inner dictator, this psychological bodyguard that ruthlessly controls the flow of facts and information, all to protect our self-image, our sense of being right, being competent.
That reminds me of that Richard Feynman quote. You must not fool yourself. And you're the easiest person to fool.
Exactly. It hits hard when you realize your own mind is actively working to confirm your biases and shield your ego from uncomfortable truths.
So it's not just an intellectual thing, it's emotional too.
Oh, definitely. Neuroscientists have found that when our core beliefs, the things central to our identity, are challenged, it can literally trigger the amygdala, our primitive lizard brain. It activates a primal fight-or-flight response.
So it actually feels like an attack, like being punched in the mind, as Grant says.
It really does feel that way, which is why when our deepest convictions are threatened, this totalitarian ego kicks in with mental armor. We either become preachers, trying desperately to convert others to our viewpoint, or prosecutors, laser-focused on finding flaws and condemning the opposing view.
That explains why political debates or arguments about really charged topics can get so heated so fast. We're not just defending ideas, we're defending our identity, our sense of self-worth.
Precisely. We become incredibly skilled at spotting weaknesses in others' arguments while remaining utterly blind to the gaping holes in our own. So overthrowing this inner dictator, this totalitarian ego, is really the first crucial step towards cultivating a genuine rethinking mindset.
And where does that start? How do you begin to challenge your own inner dictator?
It fundamentally begins with something called intellectual humility.
Intellectual humility. Okay, that sounds important. It's more than just saying, I don't know, right?
Oh, much more profound than just a casual admission. Intellectual humility is the true starting point of wisdom. It's the genuine recognition that our current understanding is inherently incomplete, that our knowledge is always, provisional.
So accepting you don't have all the answers.
And being okay with that.
Yeah.
This recognition opens the door to healthy doubt and, crucially, to genuine curiosity. We should all be able to make a pretty long, honest list of areas where we're actually quite ignorant, where our knowledge is pretty shallow.
Oh, it could make a very long list, like why bread always lands butter sewed down. Still haven't figured that one out.
Chuckles. Right. But it's not just about acknowledging personal quirks or trivia gaps. It's about adopting a fundamental stance towards knowledge itself.
Okay. Give me an example.
Well, consider Davy Oddsson, Iceland's central bank governor before the 2008 financial crisis.
Ah, yes. Not a finance guy originally, right?
Not at all. His background was incredibly diverse: radio comedy, writing, law, journalism, but zero finance or economics training. And he was famously dismissive of experts, even disbanded the National Economic Institute. He seemed, utterly blind to his own blindness, operating with immense overconfidence in a field where he lacked expertise.
And the results for Iceland during the crash were catastrophic.
Exactly. So the opposite of that is what Grant calls confident humility. It's this blend of having faith in your strengths, knowing what you do know, but balancing that with an acute awareness of your weaknesses, your blind spots.
Confident humility, I like that.
Yeah.
What are the tangible benefits? How does that actually play out?
It's transformative, really. Students who are willing to revise their beliefs, admit when they're wrong, they consistently get higher grades. High school kids who admit when they don't know something, teachers rate them as learning more effectively, contributing more to teams, and they tend to have significantly higher math grades.
Interesting. And for leaders?
Leaders who score high in both confidence and humility tend to run the most productive and innovative teams. Why? Because they're aware of their limits and they actively seek input from others to transcend them. They don't pretend to have all the answers.
So making that conscious list of areas where you are ignorant, that's actually a really practical starting point for cultivating this.
It's an excellent concrete first step.
Okay. So alongside intellectual humility, you also talk about embracing doubt, which brings us to imposter syndrome. That's usually seen as this really negative, debilitating thing, isn't it? Something we're told to overcome.
Typically, yes. And look, chronic, crippling imposter syndrome where you feel constantly unworthy or inadequate, that can be debilitating. It can lead to serious anxiety.
Yes.
But a less crippling, maybe more managed sense of doubt, the kind that actually many high achievers experience, that can be immensely beneficial.
How so? How can feeling like an imposter possibly be good?
Well, take Halla Tómasdóttir. She ran for president of Iceland. She was polling at only 1% just a month and a half before the election, basically. No chance. Wow, 1%.
Yet she surged into the final four candidates. And she directly attributed her surprising rise, believe it or not, to her imposter syndrome.
That's wild. How did feeling like an imposter help her in a presidential race? Seems totally backwards.
Because it made her a better learner and a more effective leader. Having doubts meant she didn't think she knew it all. She was constantly seeking to understand, to improve, to connect with people.
Yeah, so she wasn't complacent.
Exactly. Studies on hospital-charge nurses, for instance, showed that those with some doubts about their capabilities were actually more effective leaders. Why? Because they were more likely to seek second opinions from their colleagues. They didn't assume they had all the answers. They compensated by listening more intently, gathering more diverse input.
I remember that quote you used. Imposters rarely say, "This is how we do things around here." That's such a powerful point, isn't it? That little bit of doubt protects against the Dunning-Kruger effect, that blind overconfidence you sometimes see in people who lack competence. When you're constantly questioning, constantly eager to learn, you're just inherently more open to new ideas wherever they come from. You're not stuck.
And that openness, that willingness to question and learn, it can lead to something really liberating, right? The joy of being wrong.
The joy of being wrong, yes.
Okay, that sounds like a complete oxymoron to most people. Our instinct, that totalitarian ego we talked about, is to get defensive, find fault, protect our view at all costs. How can being wrong possibly feel joyful?
It's about a profound shift in perspective, almost revolutionary. Think about Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist.
Thinking fast and slow, yeah.
Right. He once reacted to being proven wrong about something with pure, unadulterated delight. He apparently said, "That was wonderful. I was wrong." Wonderful. When asked why, he explained that finding out he was wrong meant he was now less wrong than before. And for him, being wrong is the only way I feel sure I've learned anything. He saw it as a win for knowledge itself, not a personal loss.
Okay, I can actually relate to that a bit on a much smaller scale. Growing up, my friends used to call me Mr. Facts because I was always correcting people, always needed to be right.
Yeah.
It was like part of my identity.
The preacher mode.
Totally. But I had to learn sometimes the hard way that accepting my own fallibility, even when it bruised my ego, actually opened me up to learning so much more. There's a real rush once you get past the initial sting in realizing a belief you held was incorrect. It's exciting.
It absolutely is. Think of the physicist Andrew Lyne. He had announced this major discovery, a planet orbiting a neutron star. Huge news.
Right.
Then, at a major astronomy conference in front of everyone, he publicly admitted it didn't exist. It was a calculation error. That kind of public scientific humility, admitting a mistake openly, is rare, but it's absolutely crucial for progress. It means you're prioritizing the truth over proving yourself right, over your reputation.
And laughing at ourselves helps too, right? Like that forecaster, Jean-Pierre Bogom's, admitting he fell for desirability bias and calling it a rookie mistake.
Exactly. It helps us focus on improving ourselves, on growing, not just proving ourselves right all the time.
Yeah.
This mindset, finding that occasional glee in being wrong, leads directly to another crucial step, detaching your opinions from your identity.
Okay, detaching opinions from identity. Why is that so fundamental?
It's fundamental for fostering continuous rethinking, both in yourself and when you're trying to influence others, as we'll get to. Jean-Pierre Bogom's the forecaster we just mentioned.
The one who predicted Trump's primary win way before others.
Yeah, the military historian turned forecaster. In 2015, he gave Trump a 68% chance of winning the Republican primary. Nate Silver's model at 538 had him at only 6%.
That's a massive difference. How did he nail that when so many sophisticated models missed it?
Well, partly he detached his present views from his past. He acknowledged his initial incorrect prediction was understandable given the early data. But even more critically, he consciously detached his opinions, what he wanted to happen, from his identity as a forecaster.
So he didn't want Trump to win personally.
No, that was his personal preference. But his desire to be the best forecaster, to win the forecasting competition he was in, was stronger than his personal desirability bias. He put the pursuit of accuracy above his own preferences or, tribal affiliations.
He lived by that idea. When the facts change, I change my opinions.
Exactly. He understood that in a world changing this fast, our opinions have to be tentative, always subject to revision based on new evidence.
And he could still laugh at himself later when he did briefly fall prey to desirability bias in 2016, wanting Clinton to win so badly, calling it a rookie mistake.
That ability to laugh, to acknowledge your own fallibility, is just so key for effective rethinking. If you can genuinely find glee in being wrong sometimes, you're really on the path to getting things right more often.
Okay, so detaching opinions from identity is crucial individually, but it also seems like it sets the stage for rethinking together, in groups and relationships.
Absolutely. This is where we move beyond just individual thinking and into the dynamic, sometimes messy world of collective rethinking.
And here you make a really important distinction. Relationship conflict versus task conflict. I think most of us hear conflict and immediately think, uh-oh, bad news. Arguments, tension, hurt feelings.
Understandably so. And relationship conflict is destructive. That's when disagreements become personal feuds. It's about personalities clashing, people disliking or distrusting each other, not just debating ideas.
We've all seen that, right? In workplaces, families, people get so busy disliking each other they can't even hear the actual issue anymore.
Exactly. And studies consistently show it tanks performance, kills psychological safety, poisons team dynamics. It's bad news.
But task conflict, that's different. That can actually be good.
Yes. Task conflict is about debating ideas, challenging assumptions, exploring different perspectives on a problem or a decision. It's focused on the work, not the people. And the evidence is overwhelming. Over 100 studies, thousands of teams across all sorts of industries.
What do they show?
They consistently show that moderate task conflict, especially if it happens early in a project, leads to higher creativity, more innovative solutions, and ultimately smarter choices. We see this boost in Chinese tech firms, Dutch delivery services, American hospitals, you name it.
So the absence of conflict is not harmony, it's apathy. Is that the quote?
That's the one. It means people aren't engaged enough, don't care enough to challenge things. Apathy is often worse than disagreement.
Okay, so it's about learning to have the good fight, arguing productively without making it personal. For listeners, how do you actually do that? How do you encourage task conflict without it blowing up into relationship conflict?
The key is framing. You have to frame the disagreement as a debate about an idea or a proposed solution, not as a personal attack on the person who suggested it.
So let's scrutinize this approach, not your idea is bad.
Precisely. That allows people to engage intellectually, using their logical minds rather than getting defensive emotionally.
And sometimes you need certain kinds of people to really get that task conflict going, don't you? You talk about harnessing disagreeable people like the pirates at Pixar. That sounds risky in a typical company.
It can feel risky, sure, but it can also be hugely rewarding. Brad Bird, the director of The Incredibles.
Yeah, amazing film.
He famously and deliberately recruited, quote-unquote, misfits, black sheep, and pirates for that project at Pixar. These were people who were often a bit disgruntled with the status quo. They challenged conventions, but they also had better ideas, better ways of doing things.
His vision for The Incredibles was pretty radical for animation back then, right? Lifelike human superheroes, complex stuff.
Totally. And much of Pixar's technical leadership initially thought it was impossible, but Bird opened the garage door, as he called it, for these pirates' ideas. Like animating muscles instead of meticulously drawing every single one, which was the standard complex way.
Yeah.
They figured out that just sliding simple oval shapes against each other could create this remarkably convincing illusion of complex muscles. It was rethinking the how, driven by these unconventional thinkers.
That's brilliant. So these individuals, the ones who might get labeled disagreeable or difficult,
Right.
they can be invaluable if they're committed to the mission and supported by leaders, because they're the ones willing to speak up, give critical feedback, push boundaries beyond what maybe more agreeable, conflict-avoidant people might. They generate that essential task conflict.
Exactly. They stir the pot in a productive way.
Which leads naturally to the idea of building challenge networks. This sounds like formalizing dissent, creating a structure for getting critical feedback.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Challenge networks are basically formal or informal groups specifically designed to provide critical feedback and force rethinking. They're like your intellectual sparring partners.
What are some examples?
Well, classic ones include the Pentagon's murder boards, which exist specifically to shoot down flawed military plans before they get implemented. Google's Moonshot Factory, X, has rapid evaluation teams whose whole job is to poke holes in ambitious new ideas. And of course, the entire scientific peer review process is a massive challenge network.
I remember you mentioning getting a blunt rejection letter once where the reviewer suggested you read Adam Grant's work. The irony.
Oh, yeah. That was a moment of true, humbling glee, eventually. And a very useful reminder that even people who study this stuff can have blind spots. For me, my own challenge network, the people I trust, they're my Schlett detector. They tell me when my thinking is flawed.
And the first rule of this good fight club is what?
Avoiding an argument is bad manners. Silence, in this context, implies you don't value the other person's views enough to engage, or you don't trust your collective ability to disagree civilly. It's actually disrespectful.
That's a powerful way to think about it. So it really is possible to disagree without being disagreeable, to seek cognitive consensus, find the best idea, without totally sacrificing social harmony.
Absolutely. And arguing with someone, engaging with their ideas, can actually be a sign of respect. It means I value their perspective enough to contest it. If I didn't respect them as a thinker, why would I bother arguing?
That flips the script entirely. And it challenges the idea that agreeable people always avoid conflict.
Right. Research shows agreeable people adapt. In cooperative teams, they're accommodating. But in competitive situations, they can be just as disagreeable as anyone else. It depends on the context, the stakes. John Walker at Pixar, naturally conflict avoidant, became a fierce debater when he felt he was involved in something bigger than myself. The shared goal mattered more than his personal comfort.
Okay, this leads to a really practical, actionable strategy for having more productive conversations, especially on divisive topics. Arguing how, not why.
Yes, this is a subtle but incredibly effective shift. When we argue about why we're right, we get emotionally attached, we dig in our heels, dismiss the other side, shut down.
Yeah, it becomes about winning, not learning.
Exactly. But if we shift the focus to how a policy or an idea would actually work the specific mechanics, the nuts and bolts, it activates a very different, much more constructive rethinking cycle in everyone involved.
That's brilliant. It reminds me of the Wright brothers, their famous arguments over the propeller design.
Right. Essential conflict.
It only became truly productive when they stopped arguing why their individual designs were theoretically better and started collaborating on how they could work together to create the most optimal, functional design. It shifted from conviction to construction.
Perfectly put. And this isn't just a nice anecdote. Research consistently backs it up. Studies show that asking people how specific policies like a proposed tax or a healthcare reform would actually function, or how they'd explain the detailed steps to an expert.
What happens?
It significantly reduces their extremism on the issue, and it dramatically increases their curiosity. Why? Because it forces them to confront the gaps in their own knowledge. They realize their strong opinions were often based on a pretty shallow understanding of the mechanics.
So focusing on mechanisms, on the practicalities, not just the high-level convictions, that's a fantastic takeaway for having better arguments.
It's a concrete strategy anyone can use to move conversations forward.
Okay, so moving from dissecting ideas and having better arguments to actually influencing others, opening other people's minds, that's where the rubber really meets the road. And here, the art of influential listening takes center stage, particularly through something called motivational interviewing.
Motivational interviewing, or MI. Yes, it's a remarkably effective, evidence-based approach. It helps others change their minds, change their behaviors, but without using direct, confrontational persuasion.
Where did it come from?
It originated with a clinical psychologist named Bill Miller back in the early 80s. He was working with people struggling with addiction, and he noticed that the traditional methods, basically preaching and prosecuting addicts, telling them what they should do, almost always backfired. It just evoked resistance, defensiveness.
Made them dig in their heels more.
Exactly. So instead of telling people what to do, MI focuses on guiding them to discover their own motivations for change.
Okay, how does that work? What are the key techniques if someone wants to try this?
There are 3 core techniques that are really the bedrock of MI. First, asking open-ended questions. Not questions with yes-no answers, but questions that invite elaboration, designed to genuinely understand their perspective, not push your own agenda.
Okay, open-ended questions. What's second?
Second, engaging in reflective listening. This means actively paraphrasing, summarizing, clarifying what you've heard. It shows you've truly listened and understood their viewpoint. You're not just waiting for your turn to talk.
Makes the other person feel heard. Crucial.
Absolutely crucial. And third, affirming the person's desire and ability to change. You acknowledge their autonomy, but also build their self-efficacy, their confidence that they can actually make a shift if they choose to.
You shared a really powerful example in the book about a vaccine whisperer using these techniques. It sounds almost unbelievable.
It's a wonderful real-world application. Arnaud Gagneur, he's a neonatologist up in Quebec. He used MI techniques with a mother, Marie-Helene, who was very hesitant about vaccinating her baby, Toby.
How did he approach her? Didn't just lecture her with facts?
No, absolutely not. Instead of judging or lecturing, he expressed his genuine fear for Toby's health if he wasn't vaccinated. But, and this is key, he affirmed her right to choose and listened deeply to her reasons for hesitation for over an hour. Just listened.
An hour. Wow.
Then, only with her explicit permission did he share scientific information, but again, without lecturing. He let her questions guide the conversation. And this patient, empathetic approach, it led to a significant, lasting change in her behavior regarding vaccination.
That's incredible. And it's not just in medical settings, right? You mentioned Betty Bigambi, the Ugandan peace negotiator.
Yes, in her incredibly difficult peace talks with the notorious warlord Joseph Kony, her initial breakthrough came simply by listening to him. She famously said, "Even the devil appreciates being listened to."
That really says it all.
It captures the essence of MI. It helps you distinguish between what's called sustained talk, comments people make about keeping things the same, reasons not to change, and change talk, references to a desire, an ability, reasons to make adjustments.
So the skill is listening for that change talk.
Exactly, listening for that golden thread of their own motivations for change, and then gently pulling on it. Your role isn't to be a leader dictating the path or a follower just passively agreeing. It's to be a guide, helping people discover their own reasons for changing direction.
So ultimately, the most effective persuader is often the person themselves. It's about self-persuasion.
Absolutely. I saw this years ago with a friend who was agonizing over getting back together with an ex. She really didn't want advice.
Right. People often don't.
So instead of giving it, I just asked her to list the pros and cons herself, out loud. She ended up talking herself into rekindling the relationship, not because I convinced her of anything, but because she articulated her own reasons for doing it.
And the university donation experiment showed something similar.
Yeah. Simply asking alumni if they plan to attend an upcoming event was far more effective at boosting attendance than sending them a brochure emphasizing all the benefits of going. The question subtly prompted them to make their own internal case for attending.
It reminds me of that debate champion, Harish Natarajan. You said he consistently asked the audience questions during debates rather than just hammering his own points.
Right. He allowed them to ponder, to connect the dots, essentially to persuade themselves. It's less about forcing your viewpoint onto someone and more about creating a safe, open space for them to explore and potentially convince themselves. It's truly an art form.
And that art seems particularly vital when we're navigating really complex issues, especially those tangled up with stereotypes and polarization. This requires moving beyond what you call binary bias.
Yes, binary bias, that inherent human tendency to simplify complex issues into just two opposing sides. You know, believers versus non-believers, us versus them. We see it everywhere, especially in charged discussions, and it just actively prevents nuanced thinking.
Like Al Gore's climate change rhetoric you mentioned, obviously based on science, passionate.
Absolutely, and well-intentioned.
But sometimes the framing truth versus so-called skeptics or climate deniers, it could inadvertently create that binary, right? Potentially alienating people who might be on the fence or skeptical but not outright denying.
Exactly. It can force people to choose a side, pick a label, when reality is often a spectrum of beliefs, concerns, and potential solutions. It shuts down the exploration of that middle ground.
And Peter Coleman's work at Columbia's Difficult Conversations Lab showed this directly.
It did. Fascinatingly, when they gave people articles that framed a complex issue like gun control as having multiple viewpoints, acknowledging the complexity rather than just two opposing sides,
What happened?
it led to a remarkable 100% consensus on abortion, a different divisive issue they discussed afterwards among the participants. But when people read articles using the traditional both sides framing for gun control, only 46% reached consensus on abortion later.
Wow, 100% versus 46%. That's a staggering difference. So acknowledging complexity, seeking nuance, presenting multiple facets instead of just two extremes actually creates more common ground and capacity for agreement.
It really does. So for listeners, it means consciously seeking out sources that present many sides of an issue, not just two poles. Ask yourself, okay, what perspectives are missing between these two extremes?
And this nuanced approach, it extends powerfully to destabilizing stereotypes too, right? Highlighting the arbitrariness of group divisions.
Exactly. Prejudice and animosity often come from seeing group affiliations as these rigid, absolute defining things.
Like the intense Red Sox-Yankees rivalry you wrote about. Fans saying they'd rather root for Al-Qaeda than the Yankees. It's wild how deep that disidentification, that hatred of the other can run, even over sports.
Or that hot dog is a sandwich survey. It showed real animosity even over completely trivial group boundaries. But what if we can show how arbitrary those boundaries often are, how constructed they are?
Like the overview effect. For astronauts seeing Earth from space, no borders, realizing our common humanity. Can you create a mini version of that for, say, rival sports fans?
We tried. In a study with passionate Manchester United fans, if they first reflected on their common identity simply as soccer fans, not just Man U fans, they were far more likely to help a rival Liverpool fan who seemed injured. Broadening the identity diluted the rivalry.
Okay, interesting.
We also found that Red Sox and Yankees fans who reflected on the arbitrariness of their hatred, just thinking, hey, if I had been born in a different family, I'd probably be rooting for the other team. They actually chose less spicy hot sauce for rivals to eat and gave them easier math problems. The animosity literally decreased just by thinking about its arbitrary nature.
That's fascinating. So it's about using what you call counterfactual thinking. Imagining what-if scenarios to poke holes in those rigid stereotypes, those Jenga towers of belief.
Precisely. Like asking someone who relies on astrology, how might that Scorpio be different if they were born into a different culture, like China? Stereotypes are rarely solid. They often teeter on just a few assumed blocks. Counterfactual thinking can gently poke them over, opening minds.
And nowhere is this strategy more powerfully, almost unbelievably demonstrated than in the story of Daryl Davis and the KKK.
Ah, Daryl Davis. An extraordinary story.
A black musician who, mainly through listening and dialogue, convinced hundreds of white supremacists to leave the Klan and neo-Nazi groups. Right. Not by preaching, not by attacking, but by listening and asking questions.
His approach was a masterclass in influential listening and guiding self-persuasion. He'd actively seek out Klansmen, even high-ranking leaders like an exalted Cyclops, and just sit down and listen to their hateful rhetoric, their stereotypes about black people's smaller brains, latent criminal genes, all that nonsense. He just listened, didn't interrupt.
And then he'd gently turn their own logic back on them, like asking the Cyclops to name 3 black serial killers.
Exactly. And when the guy couldn't, Daryl listed several notorious white serial killers and then almost playfully applied the Cyclops' own latent criminal gene logic back to him, saying maybe white people had that gene.
Leading the guy to sputter, well, that's stupid.
And Daryl's response was perfect. Well, duh. What I said about you is stupid, but no more stupid than what you said about me. It planted that crucial seed of doubt. It made the man curious, made him think, and eventually that man left the KKK. Daryl didn't convert anyone in the usual sense. He guided them to persuade themselves, to see the absurdity of their own beliefs. He gave them reason to think, and they chose a better path. He literally listened them out of hate groups.
It's just an incredible testament to the power of asking questions, sparking curiosity, and truly listening. And it underscores the importance of nuance in these incredibly charged conversations that seem to dominate everything today.
Charged conversations absolutely demand nuance. We often fall into binary bias not just with issues, but with our emotions too. We think we can only feel one thing, angry or happy or defensive, but our emotional lives are usually far more complex, more mixed.
Like the Christian Cooper and Amy Cooper incident in Central Park. The outrage was justified, clearly, but the woman's simple apology later, "I was just scared," while maybe partly true, seemed to overlook the complex mix of emotions and, crucially, the power dynamics at play. It lacked nuance.
And rethinking, especially for an offender in a situation like that, ideally starts with recognizing those nuances. You can feel upset and intrigued, angry and hopeful, defensive and remorseful all at the same time. Bringing that emotional variety into difficult conversations allows for deeper understanding and much greater potential for real rethinking and resolution. It moves beyond simplistic labels.
Okay, this brings us to a crucial overarching question then. How do we actually embed this rethinking mindset, these vital skills, into our core institutions? How do we build genuine cultures of rethinking, from schools to workplaces?
It really has to start with rewriting the textbook, sometimes quite literally. Rethinking needs to be central to education. We need to move beyond just transmitting existing knowledge to actively fostering inquiry, critical thinking, and a willingness to question everything.
You talk about that history teacher, Erin McCarthy, who deliberately gave her 8th graders a textbook from the 1940s. That sounds incredibly brave for a teacher. Most would just use the latest approved version.
It was a brilliant, courageous move. Some students, they just accepted the information as fact, assuming textbooks are gospel truth. But others were genuinely shocked by the errors, the omissions, the blatant biases in this older text.
So it forced them to think.
Exactly. It prompted them to think like actual historians, like scientists, to ask, whose story's being told here? Whose is left out? What's the context this was written in? What perspectives are missing? It encouraged critical examination, not just passive absorption.
So modern teaching methods are shifting towards asking questions that don't have single right answers, encouraging productive argumentation, teaching kids to think like fact-checkers, interrogate info, don't trust rank or popularity, understand the sender isn't always the source.
Yes, it's about teaching how to think, not just what to think.
Yeah.
And that extends directly to how we teach. We need to move beyond the dominance of lecturing and embrace active learning.
Lecturing is still king in most universities and high schools, though, isn't it? It feels efficient, like you're covering a lot of ground.
It feels efficient, maybe for the lecturer, but the overwhelming evidence shows it's often pretty ineffective at fostering deep learning and, critically, at debunking existing misconceptions students might have.
How ineffective?
A massive meta-analysis looking at 225 studies in STEM fields found students scored, on average, half a letter grade worse and were 1.55 times more likely to fail the course when taught with traditional lecturing compared to active learning methods.
1.5 times more likely to fail. Wow, that's stark. So even really captivating lectures can be counterproductive.
Sometimes, yeah. They can entertain the audience so much that they scrutinize the content less carefully. They're passive receivers, not active processors.
You've experimented with active learning in your own classes, right?
I have. Instead of just lecturing, I've had students create mini podcasts or their own TED-style talks where they had to challenge conventional wisdom or question popular practices in our field. It was amazing to see straight-A students, initially terrified of being wrong, take intellectual risks. One even did a brilliant critique of TED Talks himself.
Oh, very meta.
Totally. Another time, I left a class session completely blank and asked students to pitch ideas. That led to Lauren McCann's inspired idea of having everyone write letters to their freshman selves about rethinking their majors, grades, relationships. It became this powerful exercise in reflection and adaptability.
And the grapples approach from Ron Berger, where students solve problems in stages, maybe developing their own categories for animals or testing radon gas themselves. It sounds like it intentionally creates confusion, but in a good way.
Exactly. Fostering confusion with curiosity. That great quote, "I need time for my confusion." The goal is to see confusion not as failure, but as a signal that there's new territory to explore, a puzzle to solve. This builds the muscles for lifelong rethinking.
And to make that kind of learning, that kind of rethinking possible, whether it's in a classroom or a huge company, you need something absolutely fundamental: psychological safety.
Absolutely crucial. Psychological safety is that climate of respect, trust, openness, where people feel safe enough to raise concerns, ask dumb questions, suggest crazy ideas, admit mistakes without fearing ridicule or punishment.
And the lack of it could be catastrophic, right? Like the NASA disasters.
Well, the Challenger and Columbia disasters are just tragic, textbook examples of what happens without it. In both cases, engineers repeatedly raised red flags about critical issues, the O-rings on Challenger, the foam shedding on Columbia, but their concerns were silenced, downplayed, ignored, largely due to a culture of fear and deference to authority. The consequences were devastating.
That's where leadership really comes in, role modeling humility.
Yeah.
Like Melinda Gates doing that mean reviews video at the Gates Foundation.
Yes. Reading harsh, sometimes personal feedback about herself out loud in front of employees. It was this radical act of vulnerability.
What effect did that have?
It inspired employees to recognize their own shortcomings. It reduced the perceived power distance between them and leadership, and it massively increased what researchers call a learning orientation. One employee said Melinda broke through the veneer of corporate politeness and perfection. Her honesty made her seem more human, more accessible, not less of a leader. That builds trust and makes it safe to challenge things.
And hand in hand with psychological safety, you argue for process accountability, focusing on how decisions were made, not just what the results were.
Exactly. Because if you only reward results, regardless of how they were achieved, you risk reinforcing bad strategies that just happen to get lucky. A bad process with a good outcome, that's luck. It can mislead you.
But a good process with a bad outcome.
That might be a smart experiment. Something you can learn valuable lessons from. Focusing only on outcomes breeds overconfidence and discourages intelligent risk-taking.
Amazon's famous 6-page memos seem like a great example of process accountability.
They really are, requiring important decisions to be written out in detailed narrative form and then read silently by everyone before discussion. It forces rigorous thinking, clear argumentation, and actively prevents superficial groupthink based on who talks loudest or first. It evaluates the process of thought.
And Jeff Bezos's disagree and commit principle, encouraging bets, welcoming experiments without demanding guaranteed success.
It's about evaluating the rigor of the thinking, the quality of the process, not just the immediate outcome. Ellen Ochoa at NASA, when she cast the lone no vote to delay a shuttle launch despite overwhelming consensus,
Yeah.
her decision, based on rigorous process and a willingness to dissent, the question then, later profoundly impacted how a senior leader viewed questioning procedures. It reinforced the importance of how decisions are made. This mindset helps organizations learn and avoid future regrets.
Okay, so we've covered individual biases, group dynamics, organizational culture. Let's bring it right back home now. How does all this apply to rethinking our own lives, our personal paths, escaping that tunnel vision we can all fall into?
Well, a really common trap, often starting in childhood, is what psychologists call identity foreclosure. And it often stems from that ubiquitous question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Oh man, that question. It felt like you had to pick one thing, one label, and stick with it forever. So much pressure on a kid.
And that's the trap. It can lead us to prematurely settle on a fixed sense of self, narrowing our possibilities, closing off alternatives before we've even had a chance to explore them properly. My cousin, Ryan Grant, is a poignant example you
The
mentioned.
one who wanted to be a neurosurgeon.
Yeah, spent 16 years committed to that path, a childhood dream. Even when he felt burnt out, uneasy, he persisted. Only much later did he realize he should have pivoted to entrepreneurship much earlier, a path he found way more fulfilling.
So grit, which we usually praise as this amazing virtue, can actually have a dark side here, fueling escalation of commitment to a path that isn't right anymore.
It absolutely can. It's that incredibly fine line between heroic persistence and, well, foolish stubbornness. It requires real discernment. We need to rethink how we view careers.
How so?
Instead of seeing them as these rigid identities to claim, like, I am a scientist, it's much more flexible and empowering to think of them as actions to take. I do science. This subtle shift in framing opens up so many more possibilities for exploration, for pivoting, for continuous learning throughout life.
So instead of a rigid life plan, you're suggesting we schedule regular career checkups, just like health checkups. Seems so obvious when you put it that way.
Exactly. I recommend actually putting it in your calendar maybe twice a year, January and July, to consciously ask yourself a few key questions.
Like what?
Like, when did I form my current aspirations and how have I changed since then? Have I hit a learning plateau in what I'm doing now? Is it maybe time to consider a pivot, a new challenge, a different direction entirely?
And you suggest Herminia Ibarra's framework for this kind of personal rethinking, which sounds really practical.
It is. First, entertain possible selves. Look around, observe people you admire, learn about different paths they took. Second, develop hypotheses. How might those paths align with your interests, your skills, your values? And third, run small experiments. Do informational interviews, try job shadowing, maybe take on a small sample project in a new area.
So the goal isn't to find the answer, the one perfect plan.
No. The goal is to expand your repertoire of possible selves, to stay open to the endless possibilities that rethinking unlocks. And this flexibility, this willingness to update our mental models, it also applies profoundly to our relationships.
Relationships need constant rethinking too, don't they? Not just about habits or chores, but about who our partners are, who they might become, how we're both evolving over time.
Absolutely. I had that former student who was seriously questioning marrying his girlfriend because she didn't quite fit his specific, maybe rigid teenage vision of an ambitious partner. But through a kind of relationship checkup conversation, he was able to rethink his own values, realizing they had shifted since he was a teen. And interestingly, his girlfriend later evolved her own passions and ambitions in ways he hadn't anticipated at all.
So being open to updating our ideas about our partners gives them freedom to evolve and gives the relationship room to grow.
Exactly. It prevents us from locking them and ourselves into outdated expectations.
Okay, and finally, rethinking our own lives involves challenging something we're constantly bombarded with, the relentless pursuit of happiness. You suggest, paradoxically, that chasing happiness too directly can actually lead to less happiness, maybe even depression. Why?
There are a few reasons. We might get so busy evaluating our lives against some ideal happiness standard that we forget to actually experience the good moments. We might chase peak intensity, those fleeting highs, over the more sustainable frequency of everyday positive emotions. Or we prioritize pleasure over genuine purpose and meaning.
That reminds me of the SNL sketch where Adam Sandler is a tour guide telling miserable vacationers, you're still going to be you on vacation. Changing surroundings doesn't fix deeper issues.
Exactly. Lasting happiness, genuine fulfillment, often comes more from changing our actions, joining a club, starting a project, building connections, rather than just changing our circumstances or waiting for external things to make us happy. And fundamentally, it's about pursuing meaning.
Finding purpose.
Yes, psychologists find that passions are usually developed through effort, through learning, through mastery, not just magically discovered. And meaning, which comes from feeling like you contribute, like you matter, is consistently found to be healthier, more enduring, and more fulfilling than just chasing fleeting joy. A simple test I like is asking, if this job, this project, this role didn't exist, how much worse off would others or the world be?
That's a good one. You also talk about that progression of self-esteem in careers, from I'm not important to I am important to I want to contribute to something important.
Right. And the argument is the sooner you can reach that third phase, focusing on contribution and purpose, the greater your impact and your own sense of fulfillment and happiness tend to be.
It echoes that John Stuart Mill quote you shared.
Ah, yes. Those only are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness, on the happiness of others, on the improvement of mankind. Aiming thus at something else, they find happiness, by the way.
Beautiful. So our identities, our lives, they aren't fixed, closed systems.
Not at all. They're dynamic, open-ended journeys.
Right.
And rethinking is what liberates us. It lets us continuously update not just our knowledge and opinions, but fundamentally reshape our aspirations, our relationships, and ultimately lead more meaningful, more fulfilling lives.
Wow. This has been an absolutely incredible deep dive into the power and maybe the necessity of rethinking. We started with that literal fire in Man Gulch, but the lessons, they apply so directly to the metaphorical fires, the complexities we face in our own minds and in the world every single day.
It really does feel essential now, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
It's clear rethinking isn't just some optional skill. It's a fundamental mindset. It's an ongoing practice for navigating complexity, for embracing change, and frankly, for truly thriving in the world as it is today.
And that journey of rethinking, it's always ongoing, isn't it? It's never really finished. The path towards embracing mistakes, updating our beliefs, yeah, it's full of uncomfortable moments, full of ego bruises.
Definitely.
But we handle those moments better when we remember they're actually essential for progress, for growth, for genuine learning.
And as you said, if we can't learn to find at least occasional glee, that little rush of excitement in discovering we were wrong about something,
Yeah.
it's going to be awfully hard to get much of anything right. So maybe we'll leave you, our listeners, with this thought to chew on. What core ideas, what deeply held opinions do you need to be reconsidering today? What evidence, what new perspective, what uncomfortable fact might actually change your mind?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We really hope you keep thinking again.
Thanks for tuning in to the Book Summary Podcast. If you found value in today's episode, hit that like button, subscribe for more summaries, and share it with someone who's ready to grow. Want deeper insights, exclusive book notes, and reading tips? Join our free newsletter. The link's in the description. And don't forget, if you'd like to read the full book, our affiliate link is right below. It helps support the channel and keeps the summaries coming. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing.